The cold night air was a blade against my skin, a cruel reminder that I was no longer in the stifling cage. It bit at the raw flesh of my wrists where the silver-laced manacles had been, but the pain was a distant echo. All I could feel was the mountain of a man holding me, his arm a band of iron around my waist, as he moved through the ancient forest with impossible speed. His scent, pine, storm-touched stone, and something wild that belonged only to him, was the only anchor in a world that had dissolved into a blur of shadows and moonlight. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady, powerful rhythm of his own. He had saved me from the hunters, but as the trees thinned and a colossal shadow of a mountain loomed against the stars, I knew my trial was not over. It was only just beginning. We ascended, the path growing steeper, the air thinner. I was a broken thing, a fragile weight in the arms of a king, and I could feel the eyes on us long before I saw them. They were not the cold, dead eyes of humans, but the luminous, intelligent stares of wolves. Sentinels carved from the rock face itself watched our approach from shadowy ledges, their silence more menacing than any snarl. They were his pack, his people, and I was the foreign contamination he was bringing into their sacred heart. The humiliation of my capture clung to me like a shroud, a stench of weakness and human touch that I was sure they could all smell. Garrick didn't slow. His stride was that of a monarch returning to his throne, absolute and unquestioned. He held me tighter as we passed through a massive stone archway, the entrance to his fortress. The air inside hummed with a primal energy, thick with the scent of wood smoke, roasted meat, and the living musk of hundreds of wolves. A great hall opened before us, lit by torches that cast flickering light on stern, wary faces. Alphas, betas, warriors with scars that told stories of 100 battles. They all fell silent as their king entered. Their gazes swept over him, then landed on me, a piercing, collective judgment that stripped me bare. They saw not a rescued soul, but a liability, an omega, a weakness he had shown the world. A low growl rumbled through the hall, a vibration of dissent from a massive silver-furred wolf standing near the central hearth. His eyes, chips of obsidian, were fixed on me with undisguised contempt. Garrick stopped. The entire fortress seemed to hold its breath. His own growl was not loud, but it was a sound that shook the very stones beneath our feet, a promise of utter annihilation. "Kyle Kant," he said, his voice a low thunder that silenced the other wolf instantly. "You have something to say?" The silver wolf, Kyle, bowed his head, a gesture of submission that held no sincerity. "Alpha King, you return, but you bring a stray." The word was an insult, sharp and barbed. I flinched, curling into Garrick's chest. His arm tightened, a possessive, protective gesture that sent a tremor of heat through my cold body. I felt the strange, unwelcome pull of the bond between us, a desperate instinct to seek shelter in the very storm that surrounded me. He was my captor and my savior, a paradox my shattered mind couldn't begin to unravel. "She is not a stray," Garrick declared, his voice ringing with authority that left no room for argument. "She is mine." He didn't wait for a response. With a final warning glare at Kyle, he turned from the great hall and carried me down a quieter, torchlit corridor carved from the living rock. The sounds of the pack faded behind us, replaced by the echo of our footsteps and the frantic pounding of my own blood in my ears. He had claimed me in front of his entire pack, not as a guest or a refugee, but as a possession. The feral part of me, the omega wolf that had been starved and beaten into submission, preened at the declaration. But the human part, the woman who had been caged and displayed like an animal, recoiled in terror. He brought me to a heavy oak door, pushing it open with his shoulder. The room beyond was fit for a king, vast and yet intimate. A fire roared in a stone fireplace large enough to stand in, casting a warm golden glow over thick furs piled on a massive bed and shelves carved into the rock, filled with old leather-bound books. The air smelled of him, clean and wild, and it was so potent I felt dizzy. Gently, he set me down on my feet. My legs, weak from disuse and fear, trembled and threatened to buckle. He steadied me with a hand on my arm, his touch scorching through the thin, torn fabric of my tunic. His calloused fingers were surprisingly gentle as his gaze swept over me, cataloging every bruise, every cut, the ghostly imprints of the silver chains on my skin. His jaw clenched, and for a fleeting moment, the fire in the hearth was mirrored in his eyes, a burning, murderous rage. "They will pay for this," he murmured, the words of vow spoken to the air, to the mountain, to the moon itself. Every one of them. He turned away, striding over to a wooden chest. He pulled out a soft, clean tunic of dark wool and a basin of steaming water. When he came back to me, he knelt, setting the basin on the floor. I watched him, frozen, my breath caught in my throat. This was the Alpha King, a being of myth and terror, a wolf who commanded armies and tore his enemies apart with his bare hands, and he was kneeling before me. An Omega nobody. "This will sting," he said, his voice softer now, stripped of the royal command it held before. He dipped a cloth into the warm water and reached for my wrist. I snatched my hand back, a purely instinctual reaction. "Don't!" The word was a pathetic whisper. His eyes, the color of molten gold, met mine. There was no anger in them, only a deep, aching patience that unsettled me more than his fury. "Prinith," he said, and the sound of my name on his tongue was both a balm and a brand. "I will not harm you. The silver's poison must be cleansed." My wolf, the broken thing inside me, whimpered in agreement, recognizing the truth in his words. The burns from the silver felt like they were still sizzling beneath my skin, a cold fire that leached my strength. Slowly, hesitantly, I extended my arm. His touch was firm as he took my hand, his thumb stroking softly over my pulse point before he began to clean the raw, open wounds. I hissed as the hot water met the burns, but I didn't pull away. I watched his face, the hard lines of his jaw, the intensity of his focus. He wasn't looking at me like prey. He was looking at me like something precious that had been broken. Something he intended to fix. The intimacy of the moment was suffocating, a quiet intensity that was more overwhelming than the violence of my rescue. "Why?" I finally managed to ask, my voice hoarse. "Why did you come for me? The hunters. They said no one would dare." He finished cleaning my wrists, his touch lingering for a beat too long before he moved to the cuts on my arms. "They were fools to believe their cages could hold what is mine." "But you didn't know me," I insisted, desperate for an answer that made sense. The world had taught me Omegas were disposable. We were peace weavers, nurturers, but ultimately we were the weakest links. We were never worth the risk of a king. "I'm just an Omega." Garrick paused, the cloth held motionless above a cut on my shoulder. He lifted his gaze, and his golden eyes seemed to peer directly into my soul, stripping away every lie I'd ever been told about myself. The air grew thick, charged with an unspoken truth that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. "You are many things, Prinith Valora," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "But you are not just anything." Before I could ask what he meant, the heavy oak door to the chamber creaked open without a knock. Kyle, the silver beta, stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking the light from the hall. His expression was a mask of cold fury, his disrespect for his king's privacy a blatant act of defiance. Behind him stood two other grim-faced wolves, elders of the pack, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Garrick rose to his feet in a single fluid motion, placing himself between me and the intruders. His posture shifted, the gentle caretaker vanishing, replaced instantly by the lethal Alpha King. "I gave no permission to enter," he snarled. "The council demands a word, my king," Kyle said, his voice laced with insolence. He pointed a clawed finger not at Garrick, but at me. "About her. You broke a century of truce with the human cities. You brought the scent of their hunters and their silver into our home. For that, An elderly woman with hair as white as snow stepped past Kael. Her eyes, pale and clouded with age, seemed to see more than the others. She sniffed the air, her face contorting not with disgust, but with something that looked terrifyingly like recognition and fear. "It is worse than we thought," she whispered, her ancient voice cracking like dry leaves. She stared at me, her gaze fixed on a point just above my heart. "Alpha King, Garrick, can you not smell it on her? It is faint, hidden beneath the pain and the human filth, but it is there. It is the scent of the prophecy." Kael's eyes widened in horror. "The moonborn curse," he breathed, the words falling like stones into the sudden, deathly silence of the room. "She is the one who will bring the fall of the mountain." The words fell into the silence like corpses. The fall of the mountain. The air crackled, thick with a sudden, suffocating dread. My heart, which had been hammering with fear, seemed to stop altogether. I was not just a stray, not just a weakness. I was a curse, a living omen of destruction brought into the heart of their world. Every eye in the room was now fixed on me, a unified force of terror and accusation. They no longer saw a victim. They saw a monster. Before the weight of their hatred could crush me, Garrick moved. It was not a large movement, just a slight shift of his weight, but it was enough to draw every ounce of focus back to him. The air in the room grew cold, the fire in the hearth seeming to shrink away from the sheer force of his will. His golden eyes narrowed, no longer burning with rage, but chilled to a lethal, predatory calm. "Lyra, Baz," he said, his voice deceptively soft, yet it cut through the tension like a shard of obsidian. "You forget yourself. You forget your king." The ancient she-wolf flinched, her clouded eyes widening. She bowed her head, a deep and genuine gesture of submission that Kael's had lacked. "Forgive me, Alpha King. The scent? It is from the old tales, unmistakable." "The tales are warnings, not verdicts," Garrick countered, his gaze sweeping over Kael and the other two elders, pinning them in place. "You will address my mate with the respect she is owed. Her name is Prineth. She is your Luna. You will not speak of curses or prophecies in her presence again. This is my only warning." His mate, your Luna. The words echoed in the cavernous space of the chamber, a royal decree that was both a shield and a cage. He had bound me to him, to the mountain, with titles I didn't understand and a fate I couldn't escape. Kael bristled, his silver fur seeming to stand on end. His lips curled back from his teeth in a silent, defiant snarl. "But the law is clear. Such a mark must be presented to the council." "I am the council," Garrick roared. And this time there was no restraint. The sound was a physical blow, a wave of pure, untamed power that slammed into them, making the torches flicker, and the stone itself seemed to tremble. Kael and the elders staggered back, their heads bowed, their ears flattened in pure, instinctual submission to their alpha. It was a terrifying, magnificent display of dominance, and it was all for me. "You are dismissed." He didn't need to say it twice. They practically scrambled from the room, Kael casting one last look over his shoulder, a look of pure, undiluted venom aimed directly at me. The heavy door slammed shut, leaving us once again in the echoing silence. The power that had radiated from him receded, but the tension remained. I was trembling, my legs finally giving out. I sank onto the edge of the fur-covered bed, wrapping my arms around myself. He had defended me, claimed me, named me Luna in front of his council, but it brought me no comfort. He had only painted a larger target on my back. Garrick stood with his back to me for a long moment, his broad shoulders rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I could hear the harsh sound of his breathing as he wrestled his primal rage back into its cage. When he finally turned, his face was a mask of stone, his golden eyes unreadable. "I will have a healer sent," he said, his voice clipped and formal. "You will be safe here. No one will enter without my permission." "Safe?" The word escaped my lips, a bitter, broken sound. "They think I'm a curse. They hate me, your pack. They want me gone." "My pack wants what it has always wanted, strength and security," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "They will learn that you are not a threat to that. You are the key to it." "What does that mean?" I pleaded, desperation making my voice thin. "What is this prophecy? What scent did she smell on me?" He crossed the room in 2 long strides, crouching before me so our eyes were level. The proximity was dizzying. His scent, that wild mix of storm and pine, enveloped me, and the treacherous bond between us hummed, urging me to lean into his strength, to trust him, but my fear was a wall of ice. "It means you belong here, with me," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. He reached out, his hand hovering for a second before his fingers gently brushed a stray lock of hair from my cheek. His touch was electric, a spark of heat against my cold skin. "The whispers of old wolves are nothing. All that matters is that you are mine, and I protect what is mine." He wasn't answering my questions. He was evading them, building a fortress of royal decrees and possessive claims around me instead of offering me the truth. It was the same feeling as the hunter's cage, just warmer, softer, and infinitely more confusing. "I'm not a thing to be owned, Garrick," I whispered, the words tasting like rebellion. A flicker of something, surprise, respect, crossed his features. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. "No," he agreed, his thumb stroking softly along my jawline, sending shivers down my spine. "You are not. You are a fire they tried to extinguish, and I am the mountain that will let you burn as bright as you were meant to." He rose then, leaving me breathless and reeling, and left the chamber without another word. The door clicked shut, and I heard the heavy, definitive sound of a bolt sliding into place from the outside. "For my safety," he had said. But it felt like the lock on a cage. I was alone with my racing thoughts, the words of the old she-wolf, Lyra, echoing in my mind, the scent of the prophecy, the moon-born curse. It made no sense. I was Prinith Valora, daughter of an Omega from a small, unremarkable pack in the southern valleys. My parents were gone, lost to a rogue attack years ago. There was nothing special about my bloodline, nothing remarkable about my birth. I was just me. Some time later, a gentle knock came at the door. The bolt slid back, and an older she-wolf entered, her face etched with the kind of soft wrinkles that came from smiling. Though she wasn't smiling now. She was an Omega, like me. I could sense the gentle, yielding nature of her spirit. She carried a wooden tray with a bowl of fragrant stew, a cup of water, and several small clay pots. "Luna," she murmured, bowing her head low. She wouldn't meet my eyes. The title sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. "Please," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "My name is Prinith." She risked a quick glance at me, and I saw not hatred in her eyes, but a deep sorrowful pity that was almost worse. "I am Alara," she said softly. "The Alpha King sent me to tend to your wounds, and to bring you sustenance. You must eat." She set the tray down and began to unstopper the clay pots, releasing the scents of crushed herbs and healing salves. Her movements were calm and efficient as she began to treat my burns again, her touch infinitely gentler than Garrick's had been. "They are all afraid," I stated, watching her face. Alara didn't pretend to misunderstand. She sighed, a weary sound. "They are a proud people, Luna. They have lived in the shadow of this mountain for 1,000 years. The lore is in their bones, and the prophecy of the moonborn. It is the oldest and most feared of all the tales." "What does it say?" I asked, my voice tight. She hesitated, her hand stilling. "It speaks of a wolf born under a shadowed moon, marked by its silver light, an Omega with the power to unravel the bonds that hold the packs together, whose presence would draw a great darkness to our lands and bring about the fall of the mountain, the end of our king's line." My blood ran cold. I felt a phantom itch on my skin, a memory of something I couldn't place. "That's just sorry," I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. "A children's tale to scare them." "Perhaps," Alara said, her voice full of doubt. She finished her work, applying a soothing, cool salve to the last of the burns. But Lyra is a truth-seer. Her senses do not lie. If she smelled the mark of the prophecy on you, then it is there. She stood and gathered her things, bowing her head once more. Rest, Luna. The Alpha King's protection is absolute. Pray it is enough. She left, and the bolt slid back into place, sealing me in. The stew sat untouched. My appetite was gone, replaced by a churning knot of dread. I paced the vast chamber, from the roaring fire to the cold stone walls, feeling like a trapped animal. The furs on the bed felt like a snare, the rich tapestries like shrouds. Garrick's protection was a gilded cage, and his entire world was waiting for me to destroy it. Exhaustion finally pulled at me, a leaden weight on my limbs. I walked over to the tall, narrow window, a deep slit in the mountain rock that looked out over a dizzying drop. The moon was high and full, a perfect silver disk in the ink-black sky, and its light streamed into the room, painting a stripe of pure white across the stone floor. Drawn by an instinct I didn't understand, I stepped into the beam of moonlight. It felt different than sunlight, not warm, but cool and alive, sinking into my skin like liquid silver. A strange tingling started on my forearm, right where the silver manacle had burned me the deepest. It wasn't painful, but it was insistent, a prickling sensation that grew with every second I stood in the moonlight. I looked down, my breath hitched in my throat, a strangled, incredulous gasp. There on my skin, etched in lines of faint, shimmering light, was a mark that had not been there before. It was an intricate spiral, like a curled fern or a celestial galaxy, and it was glowing with a soft, ethereal luminescence. It was beautiful and terrifying, an alien script written on my own flesh. I touched it with the fingers of my other hand. A jolt, cold and powerful, shot up my arm, a wave of ancient energy that hummed in my very bones. It felt like a key turning in a lock deep inside me, opening a door to something vast and unknown. The prophecy wasn't a scent. It wasn't a story. It was real, and it was inside me. Panic, cold and sharp, seized my heart. I snatched my arm back from the moonlight, pressing it against my chest, as if I could physically shove the glowing spiral back into my skin, make it disappear. The light vanished instantly, but the feeling of it remained. A phantom limb of energy, a humming vibration deep in my bones. I was branded, marked. The old wolf's words echoed in the sudden roaring silence of my mind. The moonborn curse. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. I scrambled away from the window, retreating into the deepest shadows of the room, near the great stone hearth. I was a disease, a blight. They would see the mark, and they would see the prophecy made flesh. Garrick's protection would mean nothing against the weight of 1,000 years of fear. He was their king, but I was their apocalypse. A heavy metallic thud echoed from the corridor, the bolt on the door. My head snapped up, my body coiling tight as a spring. Was it Kael coming to drag me before the pack? Lyra, the truth-seer, coming to confirm her terrible vision? The door swung inward on silent hinges, and the massive silhouette of the Alpha King filled the frame. Garrick stepped inside, his presence so immense it seemed to suck the very air from the room. His golden eyes found me instantly in the shadows, a predator's gaze that missed nothing. He carried a heavy fur cloak, dark as a moonless night, and his expression was unreadable, carved from granite. He said nothing, simply watched me, his stillness more unnerving than any roar. Rage, born of sheer terror, surged through me. He knew. He had to have known. This was why he'd come for me, risking war and his pack's trust. It wasn't for a mate. It was for a weapon, a key, a cursed artifact he wanted to possess. "You knew," I accused, my voice a broken rasp. I pushed myself to my feet, fueled by a desperate, cornered animal courage. "You knew what I was." He took a slow step towards me, his gaze dropping from my eyes to the arm I still clutched against my chest. "I knew you were important," he said, his voice a low, careful rumble. "Don't lie to me," I hissed, taking a shaky step forward, into the firelight. That old woman, Lyra, She smelled a prophecy on me. Kyle called me a curse. And you locked me in here, not to protect me, to hide this. With a trembling hand, I thrust my arm forward, willing the mark to reappear. It remained invisible, my skin bare except for the faint red lines of the healing burns. I felt a fool. Frantically, I dragged my arm into the single beam of moonlight still cutting across the floor. The spiral bloomed into existence, a soft silver-blue constellation on my skin. It pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic light, in time with my frantic heartbeat. I watched Garrick's face, expecting to see revulsion, fear, or a cold, calculating gleam. I saw none of those things. His eyes widened, the gold in them seeming to liquefy, to burn brighter. An expression of profound, soul-deep awe settled on his features. He looked at the mark not as a curse, but as a miracle. He moved before I could react, closing the distance between us in a single fluid stride. He dropped to one knee before me, his head bowed slightly as he gazed at the glowing sigil on my arm. He didn't try to touch it, but I could feel the heat radiating from him, the sheer, focused intensity of his being. "It is more beautiful than the lore ever described," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It was reverence. The Alpha King was kneeling in reverence to the curse I carried. My anger faltered, replaced by a dizzying wave of confusion. "What is it?" I whispered, my defiance crumbling. "Please, Garrick, tell me what it is." He rose slowly, his eyes never leaving the mark. "It is the crest of the first Luna," he said, his voice resonating with the weight of ancient history. "They call it the Moonborn Curse now because they have forgotten its true meaning. They fear what they no longer understand." "And what is its meaning?" I pressed, my heart aching with the need to know. He finally looked at me, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. "It means power, Pryneth. A power this pack has not seen since its founding. The power to bind, to heal, to see the threads that tie our world together. It is not a curse. It is a birthright." The words should have been a comfort, but they felt like a heavier chain. A birthright I never knew I had. Why? Why me? My family? We were nothing. "Your bloodline is not nothing," he countered, his voice firm. "It was hidden, scattered for its own protection. The hunters did not find you by accident. They have been searching for your line for generations." A cold dread seeped into my bones, far colder than the mountain air. "The hunters, what do they want with it?" "With me?" He hesitated, the stone mask slamming back into place. "That is a burden for me to carry, not you." "No!" I pulled my arm back, the light of the mark vanishing as I stepped out of the moonlight. The warmth of his proximity turned suffocating. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to save me and then lock me away with half-truths and royal proclamations. It's my life, it's my skin. I have a right to know who is hunting me and why." The fire in my eyes must have mirrored the one in the hearth, because something in his expression shifted. The king softened, and the wolf looked out, seeing not a subject, but a mate. "The air in here is stale with fear," he said, changing the subject with the deftness of a ruler. "You need the sky." He held out the heavy fur cloak. "Come, I will not have you be a prisoner in my home." My first instinct was to refuse, to demand answers, but the thought of fresh, cold air, of seeing the stars without bars of a cage between us, was an irresistible lure. The chamber was beginning to feel like a tomb. Wordlessly, I allowed him to drape the heavy cloak over my shoulders. It was impossibly soft and smelled of him, a comforting, possessive weight that settled my trembling. He led me not back into the main corridors, but through a smaller, unassuming door at the back of the chamber I hadn't noticed before. It opened onto a narrow, winding stone staircase, lit by widely spaced torches that flickered and danced. The air grew colder, sharper as we ascended. We emerged onto a high, windswept parapet, carved into the very peak of the mountain. I gasped. The world was laid out below us, a breathtaking tapestry of moon-silvered peaks and shadow-drowned valleys. The forest we had raced through was a dark, brooding sea, and the stars. They were close enough to touch, a shower of diamond dust against black velvet. For the first time since my capture, I felt a breath that was truly my own, clean and deep and free. "It's beautiful," I whispered, walking to the low stone wall at the edge of the precipice. "It is our sanctuary," Garrick said, coming to stand beside me. He didn't touch me, but he stood close enough that I could feel his body heat against the chill. "The heart of my kingdom, and now yours." The peace of the moment was shattered by a sound from below, the sharp clash of steel on steel, followed by a guttural roar of effort. I peered over the edge. Far below, in a vast, torchlit training yard, wolves were sparring. Some fought with claws and teeth, shifting in a blur of fur and fury. Others, in their human forms, wielded massive broadswords, their movements a brutal, deadly dance. My eyes were drawn to one warrior in particular. His fur, in wolf form, was the color of burnished silver, catching the torchlight as he moved with a speed and ferocity that outmatched all others. Kyle. He disarmed his opponent with a vicious, precise move, sending the other wolf's sword skittering across the stone. He stood over his defeated rival, his chest heaving, and then, as if sensing my gaze, he looked up. Across the vast distance, his obsidian eyes locked with mine. There was no mistaking the challenge, the pure, unadulterated hatred in his gaze. It was a promise of violence. A thick, palpable menace rolled off him in waves, a shadow reaching all the way up the mountain to touch me. I recoiled from the edge, a chill unrelated to the wind tracing its way down my spine. "He wants to kill me," I breathed. Garrick's hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around my arm, not painfully, but with an unshakable, possessive strength. His entire body had gone rigid, his focus locked on the yard below. A low growl, like the grinding of tectonic plates, rumbled in his chest. "Let him try," Garrick snarled, the sound of vow of death. The air around us seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "Kyle tests the boundaries of my patience. It is a mistake he will not make twice." The power rolling off him was immense, a raw primal force that made my own wolf spirit want to curl at his feet. But beneath my fear of Kyle and my awe of Garrick, something else stirred. A flicker of my own anger. I had been prey for weeks. I had been terrified, humiliated, and broken. I would not be prey here, not in my own home. I straightened my shoulders, turning to face him fully. "And what happens when I'm alone? When you are not here to stand between me and him? Will you keep me locked in that room forever?" "You will never be alone," he stated, as if it were the simplest fact in the world. "That is not an answer, Ka," I shot back. "I am not one of your swords, to be kept in a sheath until you have need of it. I am the one they hate. I am the one with this brand on my arm. I will not hide from them." His golden eyes blazed, a mixture of fury and something that looked dangerously like pride. He stepped closer, backing me against the cold stone of the parapet wall. He caged me in with his body, his hands planting on the stone on either side of my head. His scent was overwhelming, flooding my senses. "You have no idea what you are asking," he growled, his face inches from mine. His hatred is a simple thing. The hunters, the prophecies, the politics of the packs. Those are shadows with teeth you cannot comprehend. "Then teach me," I cried, my hands coming up to press against his hard chest. "Stop treating me like a fragile piece of glass. You called me fire, then let me learn to burn." His gaze dropped to my lips. The air between us became a roaring inferno. The primal hum of the bond vibrated through my very soul, a desperate, aching pull that demanded I close the distance between us. His control was fraying. I could see it in the tightening of his jaw, the slight flare of his nostrils as he took in my scent. "You are playing with forces you do not understand, Prinith," he whispered, his voice dangerously rough. He leaned in and I hoped, he was going to kiss me. But instead his lips brushed against my ear, his breath a hot caress against my skin. The prophecy does not say you will bring the fall of the mountain, he murmured, his voice a dark, secret confession that shattered my world anew. The oldest texts say the moon-born Omega will not be the mountain's end. She will be its rebirth, and the hunters know it. They did not come to kill you, little wolf. They came to steal our future. His confession hung in the frozen air between us, a truth so immense it stole my breath and left my universe tilted on its axis. They came to steal our future. I was not a harbinger of doom. I was a prize, a hope. The revelation was a crushing weight, heavier than any curse, because it meant the lives of his people, this entire mountain fortress of proud, wary wolves, now rested on my fragile shoulders. The heat of his body, the intensity in his golden eyes, the raw possessiveness in his grip. It was all too much. The bond between us flared, a humming, vibrant chord that sang with a terrifying sense of rightness. My wolf, the primal instinct I had suppressed for so long, wanted to yield, to press myself into him and let his strength become my own. But the woman, Prinith, the one who had been caged and betrayed, recoiled from the sheer magnitude of his claim. He must have felt my inner turmoil, the war raging within me. With visible effort, he released his grip on the wall and took a step back, breaking the spell. The sudden cold that rushed into the space between us was a physical shock. He composed himself, the Alpha King once more sliding his mask of command into place. But I had seen the wolf beneath. I had felt his raw, unguarded need. "The night is cold," he said, his voice once again a low, controlled rumble. "You should rest." "Rest?" I asked, a note of hysteria creeping into my voice. "You tell me that my entire life has been a lie, that a cult of hunters wants to capture me to steal the future of your people, and you think I can rest?" "I will handle the hunters," he stated, the words an unbreakable promise of violence. "I will handle the council. I will handle Kael. Your only duty is to heal, to be safe." He was building the walls of the cage higher, decorating them with words of protection and duty. He turned to lead me back to the stairs, but I stood my ground, wrapping the heavy fur cloak tighter around myself like armor. "No," I said, the word quiet but firm. "My duty is to understand. You said the lore has been forgotten. You mentioned old texts. Where are they? I want to see them." Garrick stopped, his back still to me. I could see the rigid line of his shoulders, the tension in his neck. "That is not a place for you." "Why not? Because I'm a stray? A curse? Or because I'm just a weak Omega who shouldn't be trusted with her own history?" The words were sharper than I intended, laced with the bitterness of a lifetime of being underestimated. He turned slowly, and the fire was back in his eyes, but this time it was tempered with a grudging respect. "It is a place of power, of memories. The knowledge within is not always gentle. I will not have it harm you." "The hunter's cage harmed me. The silver manacles harmed me. The hatred in your beta's eyes harms me," I countered, my voice gaining strength with every word. "Knowledge can't be worse than that. I am not asking for your permission, Alpha King. I am telling you what I need." A long, tense silence stretched between us, the only sound the mournful cry of the wind sweeping across the parapet. A slow smile, sharp and dangerous, touched the corner of Garrick's mouth. "You are at that," he murmured, more to himself than to me. He held my gaze for another heartbeat, a silent battle of wills passing between us. Then he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Tomorrow," he said, "at first light, I will have Alara bring you." It was a victory, but a conditional one. He was still controlling my access, managing my every move. But it was a start. It was a crack in the wall of his fortress. The rest of the night was a sleepless torment. I lay in the massive bed, cocooned in furs that smelled of him, and stared into the dying embers of the fire. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glowing spiral on my arm, felt the phantom hum of its power. I was an Omega of moonlight, a vessel for a power I couldn't comprehend, and the fate of a kingdom rested on my ability to wield it. True to his word, as the first pale fingers of dawn painted the narrow window gray, a soft knock came at my door. It was Alara, her kind face etched with worry. She carried a tray with bread, cheese, and hot tea, but her eyes darted around the room, as if expecting to find me changed by the night. "The Alpha King sent me," she said, her voice a respectful whisper. "He said, 'You wish to visit the archives of the elders.'" She spoke the name with a reverence that bordered on fear. "I do," I said, forcing a strength I didn't feel. Alara led me through the quiet, sleeping corridors of the mountain. We descended countless stone steps, going deeper into the rock, the air growing cooler and smelling of dust and time. We passed no one. It was clear Garrick had ordered my passage to be a secret. We arrived at a pair of immense doors carved from petrified, iron-dark wood, bound with straps of ancient bronze. There was no handle, no lock. "Only the Alpha King, or one he designates, may enter," Alara explained. She placed her palm flat against the center of the door. A faint silver light, much like the glow of my own mark, traced the edges of her hand for a moment. With a deep groan that echoed from the very bones of the mountain, the great doors swung inward. The room beyond was a vast circular cavern. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with tens of thousands of scrolls and leather-bound books, tucked into countless hand-carved alcoves. A single wide shaft in the center of the dome ceiling opened to the sky, allowing a column of soft morning light to illuminate the dust motes dancing in the still air. The place felt sacred, holy, a repository of a million sleeping memories. The sheer weight of history was a palpable presence. "Where do we even start?" I whispered, overwhelmed. "The oldest texts are at the heart," Alara said, guiding me toward the center of the room. "The stories of the beginning." We found a section of crumbling scrolls, their parchment fragile as a butterfly's wing. Alara, with hands that were surprisingly steady, unrolled one with infinite care. It was a history of the Pack's founding, written in a spidery, faded script. We scanned through tales of great battles, of the first Alpha King who carved this fortress from the rock, and then my breath caught. There was a drawing, an elegant, simple rendering in charcoal and berry ink. It depicted a she-wolf, her form more ethereal than the warriors drawn beside her. Her eyes were wide and luminous, and on her forearm, rendered in what looked like silver ink, was the spiral, the crest of the first Luna. "Liral," Alara read from the text, her finger tracing the words beside the image. "She who walked with the moon. It says her blood was the mountain's soul, her touch the seed of its healing. When the great famine came, she gave of her light, and the winter broke. When the plague of shadows threatened to devour the pack, she sang the song of binding and mended their spirits." It was a story of a savior, a healer, not a curse. "It doesn't say how," I murmured, staring at the spiral on the page. "How did she do these things? Perhaps this—" Alara pointed to a smaller secondary scroll that had been tucked inside the first. This one was different. The script was more feminine, more flowing. It felt like a journal. I unrolled it carefully. It spoke of moonlight, of the connection between the moon and the blood of her line. It spoke of a ritual, a place deep within the mountain called the Heartstone, where the Luna could channel the moon's power directly into the mountain itself, renewing its life, strengthening its people. It was a symbiotic relationship. She was not just a leader. She was the pack's lifeblood. A single line, written in a slightly different ink, as if added later as a warning, chilled me to the bone. But the gift is a lure. In the hands of our enemies, it becomes a cage, the mountain's power siphoned, its people enslaved to a false Luna. Such power must only be given freely. A vow of the heart under the light of the blood moon. "The blood moon," I whispered. "It is a rare celestial event," Alara said, her eyes wide. "A sign of great change. The seers have been whispering. There will be one in 3 nights' time." 3 nights. The timeline felt like a death sentence. Before I could process the implications, a shadow fell over the scroll. "Rummaging through old stories, stray?" The voice was a contemptuous sneer. I looked up, my heart leaping into my throat. Kyle stood at the edge of the column of light, his arms crossed over his massive chest. His obsidian eyes were filled with a cold, mocking fire. He had followed us. "You are not permitted here," Alara said, her voice trembling but firm. Stepping slightly in front of me, Kyle laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that desecrated the chamber's silence. "I go where I please. I wanted to see the king's new pet for myself. See what trinket he nearly started a war for." His eyes landed on the open scroll, on the drawing of the first Luna. A look of pure disgust twisted his features. "So you believe the fairy tales? You think that mark on your skin makes you a queen? It makes you a target, a liability that will get us all killed." "It is our history," I said, finding my voice. I refused to let him see my fear. I stood, meeting his gaze directly. "A history you seem eager to forget." "I forget nothing," he snarled, taking a step closer. The air around him crackled with aggression. Ilara flinched back. "I remember that our strength comes from tooth and claw, not from moon magic and faded scrolls. The king's obsession with you has made him weak. The pack sees it. They whisper. They wonder if he is still fit to lead. His strength is the only reason you still draw breath, Kyle." A new voice cut through the tension, cold as a winter blade. Garrick stood at the entrance to the archives, a looming silhouette of controlled fury. He hadn't been far. He had been watching, waiting. He walked slowly into the light, his golden eyes fixed on his beta. Every step was deliberate, a promise of impending violence. "I gave you an order," Garrick said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You were not to come near her." Kyle bristled, but he didn't back down completely. "She is in the archives, filling her head with nonsense. She will be the death of us. You are blind to it." "The only thing I am blind to is a reason why I should let you live to see another sunrise," Garrick growled. He moved to stand in front of me, a living shield of muscle and rage. But as he passed, I reached out and grabbed his arm. "No," I said, my voice clear and steady. He stopped, looking down at my hand on him, his expression one of utter shock. I looked past him, directly at Kyle. "You are wrong," I said, my voice ringing with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. "The king is not weak because of me. He is strong because he is willing to fight for the future of this pack, a future written in our oldest laws. You are the one who is weak, because you are ruled by fear." Kyle was stunned into silence, his jaw working as he stared at me, then at my hand on Garrick's arm. Garrick slowly turned his head, his molten gold eyes meeting mine. The rage was still there, but beneath it was something else. Awe, pride. The bond between us hummed, no longer a source of fear, but a current of shared strength. He looked back at Kyle, his face implacable stone. "You are confined to the training grounds until the blood moon. You will not speak to her, you will not look at her. If you break this vow, I will strip you of your rank and your hide. Now get out of my sight." Kyle shot me one last look of pure hatred before turning and stalking from the archives. The silence he left behind was thick with unspoken emotions. I slowly removed my hand from Garrick's arm, but he captured it, his fingers lacing with mine. His grip was warm, solid, an anchor in the storm. He looked down at our joined hands, then back at my face. "You were right," he murmured, his voice a low rumble meant only for me. "I should not have hidden this from you." His thumb stroked the back of my hand, sending shivers up my arm. "The fire I saw in you, let it burn, Prineth. Let it burn this whole mountain to the ground if it must. I will be the wind at your back." He lifted my hand, his gaze intense, and lowered his head, but he didn't kiss my lips. He turned my hand over and pressed his lips to the pulse point on my wrist, right over the veins that carried my moon-touched blood. The touch was searing, a brand of heat and possession. Then he inhaled, his breath ghosting over my skin as he took in my scent. It was a deeply primal gesture, an act of claiming, of marking me as his, in a way that was more profound than any title. He raised his head, his eyes blazing with a fierce, unwavering light. "The pack questions my choice," he said, his voice a vow that echoed in the sacred silence. "On the night of the blood moon, they will have their answer, and you will be the one to give it to them." His words were a sentence and a coronation, both delivered with the searing heat of his lips against my wrist. "You will be the one to give it to them." He was not just accepting my role in the prophecy, he was forcing it, placing the full weight of his kingdom's faith, or its lack thereof, squarely upon me. For the first time I felt a flicker not of fear, but a fierce, defiant purpose. He had called me fire. Kyle had called me a weakness. On the night of the blood moon, I would show them all which one was true. The next 3 days were a blur of intense preparation and simmering tension. The entire mountain seemed to be holding its breath. Garrick, true to his word, became my shadow and my tutor. He did not lock me away again. Instead, he opened the heart of his world to me. We spent hours in the archives, with Alara's gentle guidance, poring over the fragmented history of Lirel and the moonborn Lunas who had come after her, a lineage so secret and so broken that only whispers remained. The text spoke of the bond between the Luna and the Alpha King, not just as a romantic connection, but as a conduit. His strength, his connection to the pack and the land, would be the anchor for my power. Without his trust, my own abilities would be wild, unfocused, and dangerous. We were two halves of a key, useless without the other. This explained the visceral, almost painful pull I felt toward him. It was the magic in my blood, recognizing its counterpart. During the day, he took me through the fortress, from the armory where the scent of oiled steel and warrior sweat hung thick in the air, to the communal kitchens where the rich aroma of roasting meat and baking bread filled me with a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. He introduced me not as a stray or a curse, but simply as Prinith, his voice leaving no room for the title to be questioned. The pack's reactions were mixed. The elders, like Lyra, watched me with a heavy, fearful reverence. The warriors offered curt, respectful nods, their loyalty to Garrick overriding their superstition. But the others, the rank and file, stared with open suspicion. Their whispers followed me through the stone halls, a constant, chilling reminder that I was an outsider, an unknown quantity that could shatter their world. The most difficult moments were with Garrick himself. The intimacy between us grew with every shared glance, every brush of our hands as we studied the ancient scrolls. He taught me the names of the constellations from the high parapet, his arm a warm, solid weight around my shoulders. He explained the pack's laws, his voice a low murmur in the firelight of his chambers. These quiet moments were more dangerous than any open hostility. They chipped away at the walls I had built around my heart, making me want to trust this terrifying, magnificent wolf who had saved me. One evening, as we sat before his hearth, the silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. I watched the flames dance, the heat warming my face. "Were you ever afraid?" I asked softly, not looking at him. "When you came for me? You knew what the hunters were. You knew what it would cost." He was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with an emotion he rarely showed. "The first time I saw you, you weren't in that cage." I turned, my brow furrowing in confusion. "What?" "Months ago," he said, his golden eyes fixed on the fire, but seeing something far away. "I was on a diplomatic mission near the Southern Territories. A border dispute. I was tracking a scent, rogues, when I saw your pack. You were with the pups by a stream. You were laughing." The memory hit me with a jolt. A warm afternoon, the sound of splashing water, the sweet scent of wildflowers. It felt like a lifetime ago. "You were a light," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, "in a world that is mostly shadows. The bond, it struck me then. A lightning bolt to the soul. I knew who you were to me. I was going to approach your alpha, to make the formal claim. But then word came of an uprising on the northern border. I had to leave. I told myself I would return in a week, a month at most. He clenched his fist, his knuckles white. By the time I came back, the hunters had already been there. Your pack was scattered. You were gone. The fear I felt then. He shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. It was not a fear of hunters or war. It was the fear of being too late. My heart ached. He hadn't just saved a fated mate. He had been searching for a woman he'd already chosen, already lost once. The depth of his desperation, the fury of his rescue, it all clicked into place. Garrick, I whispered his name, and he finally turned to look at me. The control was gone from his face, replaced by a raw, aching vulnerability that mirrored my own. I moved without thinking, closing the small space between us. I cupped his jaw, my thumb stroking the rough stubble on his cheek. He leaned into my touch, a low growl of pure, desperate need rumbling in his chest. His eyes closed, and his hand came up to cover mine, pressing it tighter against his skin. The bond between us sang, a clear, powerful note of homecoming. This was right. This was fate. He leaned in, and this time I knew he wouldn't stop. His lips were about to meet mine when a frantic pounding echoed from the chamber door. Alpha King, you must come. The moment shattered. Garrick pulled back, the alpha mask slamming into place. He rose, his growl of frustration a palpable thing. What is it? He roared. The door burst open and a young warrior, his face pale and blood-streaked, stumbled in. The sentinels on the eastern pass, my lord. They're dead. Silver. My blood ran cold. The hunters. They're here, Garrick snarled, his eyes flashing with lethal promise. He was already moving, grabbing a dark leather jerkin from a chest. They're not attacking, the warrior gasped. It's a message. They left. A banner, and one of our own. He's alive. Barely. Garrick was out the door in a flash. A whirlwind of deadly purpose. Was right behind him, ignoring the warrior's protest. I would not be hidden. I would not be protected. This was my fight, too. We reached the great hall to a scene of grim, furious silence. The pack was gathered, their faces hard as stone. In the center of the hall lay a wolf on a fur pallet, his flank laid open with a cruel wound that sizzled with a faint black smoke. Silver poisoning. Lyra and Alara were frantically applying poultices, their faces grim, but it was what stood beside him that drew a collective gasp of horror. A wooden stake had been driven into the stone floor, and impaled upon it was a torn piece of cloth. My cloak, the one I had worn when I was captured. Below it, smeared in the dark, dried blood of the sentinels, was a symbol, a stylized silver cage, a message for me, a reminder of where I had been, and where they intended to put me again. A low, collective growl rippled through the pack. Their eyes, once filled with suspicion, now turned to me with a new kind of fear, the fear that I was a magnet for this destruction. Kael pushed his way to the front, his face a mask of cold triumph. He pointed a shaking finger at the bloody banner. There is your prophecy, Alpha King, he roared, his voice ringing through the hall. There is the darkness your stray has drawn to our door. Our sentinels are dead. Our borders are breached. Because of her. The pack rumbled in agreement, their fear turning to anger. They took a step forward, a menacing wave of fur and teeth. Garrick moved to stand in front of me, his body a living wall, a snarl ripping from his throat that promised death to any who took another step. Enough, he commanded, his voice shaking the very foundations of the hall. But before he could say more, I stepped out from behind him. I walked forward, my legs trembling but steady, until I stood before the bloody banner, the scent of my own fear and my packmate's blood filling my nostrils. I looked at the wounded wolf, at the faces of his kin, filled with grief and rage, and I would not let Kael use their pain to fuel his hatred. I turned to face the pack, my gaze sweeping over every single wolf, meeting their eyes without flinching. He is right, I said, my voice clear and strong, echoing in the stunned silence. They have come for me. This blood was spilled because of me. I paused, letting the weight of my admission settle. The hunters want you to be afraid. They want you to turn on each other. They want you to cast me out, because they know that together, with the power that sleeps in my blood, we are strong enough to destroy them forever. They are not attacking us because I am a weakness. They are trying to tear us apart because they know that I am the one thing that can make us unbeatable. I walked over to the wounded sentinel. I knelt beside him, ignoring Alara's worried gasp. I looked at the silver-poisoned wound, at the black veins spreading from it, sapping his life away. The text had spoken of healing, of the Luna's touch being the seed of the mountain's life. It was a fairy tale, a legend, but it was all I had. I closed my eyes, reaching for the humming power inside me, the connection to the moon, to the mountain, to the Alpha King who stood guard behind me. I placed my hand gently on the wolf's fur, just beside the terrible wound. They want you to believe I am a curse, I said, my voice dropping to a powerful, resonant tone that felt both ancient and my own. Tonight, under the blood moon, I will show you that I am our salvation. A gasp rippled through the crowd. As my fingers made contact with the sentinel's skin, a soft silver-blue light bloomed from my hand, the same light as the mark on my arm. It pulsed, gentle and cool, and sank into the wolf's body. The black sizzle of the silver poison faltered. The angry red of the wound began to soften. The sentinel, who had been shivering in agony, let out a soft sigh, his breathing evening out. I opened my eyes. The entire pack was staring, their faces a mixture of disbelief, terror, and dawning, miraculous hope. Kael's jaw was slack with shock. Garrett came to my side, his presence a warm, solid certainty. He looked down at my hand, at the gentle light flowing from it, and then at me. The pride in his eyes was so fierce, so absolute, it was like staring into the sun. The sky visible through the high windows of the hall was beginning to darken, the dying sun painting the clouds in the shades of blood red and bruised purple. The moon was rising. The challenge was issued by the hunters, Garrick announced, his voice booming with renewed power and authority. It will be answered by our Luna. He offered me his hand, not to pull me up, but to join me. It is time. I took his hand. The contact was an anchor in a sea of roaring uncertainty. The warmth of his skin, the solid strength of his grip, was the only thing that felt real. As one, we turned from the wounded sentinel, who now breathed with the deep, even rhythm of healing sleep. The silver light from my touch had faded, but a new light was dawning in the eyes of the pack. The raw hatred in their stares had been replaced by a stunned, fragile awe. They looked at me, and for the first time they were not seeing a curse. They were seeing a miracle. The great hall parted before us, a silent living sea of fur and muscle. Kael stood frozen, his face a battleground of shock and dawning comprehension, his entire worldview shattered by the gentle power he had just witnessed. Garrick led me from the hall, not up towards the parapets, but down, deeper into the mountain's living heart. The pack followed, a silent procession, their heavy footfalls the only sound besides the frantic drumming of my own heart. The air grew ancient, thick with the scent of deep earth and dormant magic. The torchlight gave way to a soft internal luminescence from veins of quartz in the stone walls. We arrived in a cavern so vast it felt like a captured piece of the night sky. The ceiling was a dome that opened to the heavens, and framed perfectly within it was the blood moon, a swollen, weeping eye of coppery light that bathed the entire chamber in an ethereal, blood-red glow. In the center of the cavern rose a colossal, jagged crystal, easily twice the height of a man. It was the Heartstone. It was not inert. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light of its own, a deep blue that warred with the crimson wash from the moon. This was the nexus of the mountain's power, the very soul of Garrick's kingdom. The pack elders were waiting, Lyra at their head. Her clouded eyes were fixed on me, no longer with fear, but with a profound, soul-shaking reverence. "The moon is at its zenith," she whispered, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "The Heartstone is open. It waits for the vow." Garrick led me to the foot of the great crystal, The energy radiating from it was immense, a physical pressure against my skin, a deep hum that vibrated in my teeth. He released my hand and turned to face me, taking both of my hands in his. The entire pack, his council, his warriors, were our witnesses, their faces upturned in the eerie light. "The lore says the stone requires a vow of the heart," he said, his voice low and resonant, yet it carried to every corner of the cavern. He was speaking to me, but his words were for all of them to hear. "It is not a king's promise to his people. It is a wolf's vow to his mate. It is the anchor that will allow you to hold the mountain's power without being consumed by it." His golden eyes, burning in the red moonlight, held mine. He saw the terror there, the doubt that screamed I was not strong enough for this. "Prinith Valora," he began, his voice dropping, becoming a raw, intimate thing that stripped away his crown and his armor, leaving only the man, the wolf. "I saw you when you were free, and you were the hope I did not know I was searching for. I found you when you were caged, and you became the fire in my blood. You carry the future in your veins, but it is the strength in your soul that has captured mine." He raised one of my hands, the one that bore the invisible mark, and pressed his lips to my knuckles. "I am Garrick Tainer, Alpha of this mountain. I am your mate. My heart is your heart. My strength is your shield. My life is your vow. Before my people and before the sacred stone, I bind my soul to yours. Forever." The final word echoed in the sacred silence, a promise that settled deep in my bones. The humming of the bond between us exploded into a symphony. The fear did not vanish, but it was joined by a fierce, soaring love that was stronger. He was my anchor. He was my home. Tears streamed down my face, hot against my cold skin. "Garrick," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "Trust me, Prinith," he murmured, for my ears alone. "Trust yourself." He squeezed my hands one last time, then released me and stepped back, giving me the space to face my destiny alone. I turned to the Heartstone. It pulsed before me, a living, breathing entity of crystal and light. I took a deep, shuddering breath and reached out. My fingers, still trembling, brushed against its cool, smooth surface. Power, raw and absolute, crashed into me. It was not a gentle stream. It was a tidal wave, a galaxy of energy and sensation. I felt the mountain, every tunnel, every stone, every drop of water in the hidden springs. I felt the life force of every wolf in the cavern, their hopes, their fears, their grief for their fallen sentinels. I felt Garrick's unwavering belief in me like a sun at my back. It was too much. The power threatened to tear me apart, to shred my consciousness into a million scattered pieces. The anchor, his voice echoed in my mind. "I am your anchor." I focused on the feeling of his vow, the warmth of his soul, bound to mine. I used it to ground myself in the hurricane of power. And then I did not just feel the pack. I connected to them. My spirit reached out, touching each and every one of them, mending the frayed edges of their fear with the silver light of my own hope. A collective gasp rose from the crowd as they felt the touch of their Luna's magic, a gentle, healing wave that soothed their agitated spirits and unified them in a way they hadn't been for a century. The crest of the first Luna flared to life on my arm, no longer faint, but a blazing spiral of silver-blue fire that cast its own light against the blood moon's glare. I was not just channeling the mountain's power. I was the mountain. It was in this moment of pure, blinding connection that the first scream came. It was not a cry of awe. It was a cry of agony, cut short. Chaos erupted at the edges of the cavern. From shadowed, forgotten tunnels that honeycombed the chamber walls, figures emerged. They were cloaked in black, moving with a silent, unnatural swiftness. Humans, the hunters. They had bypassed every sentinel, every guard. They carried long, cruel blades of gleaming silver, and their eyes, visible in the strange light, were cold and dead. They had been waiting for this. They had used the ritual, the massive surge of power as a beacon to lead them straight to the pack's heart. The wolves roared, a unified sound of outrage and fury. Warriors shifted in a blur of fur and claw. Meeting the charge, the cavern became a maelstrom of desperate, brutal combat. The sickening scent of fresh blood and the ozone tang of silver filled the air. Garrick was a whirlwind of death, his claws and teeth ablur as he tore through two hunters who had tried to rush the Heartstone. My connection to the stone was still absolute. I felt every blow against my pack as if it were against my own skin. The pain was excruciating. A hunter's blade sliced into the flank of a young wolf near the entrance, and I cried out, doubling over as a phantom agony seared my own side. Through the haze of pain, I saw him. The leader, he was larger than the others, his face covered in ritual scars. He ignored the fighting wolves, his dead eyes fixed on me. He held a length of chain, its links forged of the same dull, poison-gray silver as my manacles. He was coming not to kill me, but to capture me, to chain me to the stone and siphon its power, just as the old scroll had warned. He lunged, but a silver-gray blur intercepted him. Kael. With a roar of pure selfless fury, he threw himself at the hunter leader, his claws tearing at the man's leather armor. "For the pack!" he bellowed, his voice no longer filled with contempt, but with the desperate loyalty of a warrior defending his home. He had made his choice. Garrick was fighting his way back to me, but he was surrounded. The hunters were disciplined, their silver blades keeping the powerful wolves at bay. They were trying to isolate me. Rage, cold and pure, unlike anything I had ever felt, rose within me. They would not take my pack. They would not harm my mate. They would not defile this sacred place. The power of the mountain surged at my command. I was not just its heart. I was its wrath. I straightened up, planting my feet on the stone floor. I did not release my hold on the Heartstone. I drew from it, pulling its ancient energy through my body, shaping it with my will. The glowing spiral on my arm burned with the intensity of a star. "Get out of our home!" I screamed, my voice amplified by the cavern's magic until it was the roar of the mountain itself. I threw my hands forward. A wave of pure silver-blue light erupted from the Heartstone, not a wave of force, but a wave of binding, of absolute lunar authority. It washed over the cavern. It did not harm the wolves. To them, it was a warm, strengthening caress. But when it hit the hunters, they screamed. They dropped their silver blades as if the metal had become white-hot. They clawed at their own skin, their minds assaulted by a power they could not fight, a crippling empathy that forced them to feel every ounce of pain they had ever inflicted. They collapsed, writhing on the stone floor, their minds broken, their threat neutralized. The fighting stopped. The cavern was filled with the panting of wolves and the pathetic moans of the defeated hunters. The pack stared at me, at the silver light that still clung to me like a corona. Their faces filled with an emotion that went beyond awe. It was devotion. Garrick finally reached me, his fur matted with blood, none of it his own. He shifted, his human form appearing in a swirl of primal energy. His face was bruised. A shallow cut on his cheek was already healing, but his golden eyes blazed with a love so powerful it buckled my knees. "Prinith," he breathed, his voice thick with reverence. He cupped my face, his thumbs gently wiping away my tears. "My Luna, my salvation." He leaned in to kiss me, a kiss of victory, of promise, of forever. But just as his lips were about to touch mine, a final, triumphant scream echoed from the edge of the cavern. The hunter leader, though broken in mind, had been driven by one last, desperate command. He had crawled, dragging his useless body across the floor, ignored in the aftermath. He wasn't reaching for a weapon to kill us. He held a dagger, not of silver, but of something far worse, a shard of glistening, dead-black obsidian that seemed to drink the very light from the air. With a final, gargling cry, he plunged it not into me or into Garrick, but deep into the base of the Heartstone itself. The sound was not a crack. It was a shriek, a cry of agony from the stone itself. The beautiful blue light within the crystal flickered. and a network of black, ugly veins began to spread from the point of impact, like poison through a living heart. The hunter leader fell back, a terrible, victorious grin on his face as the life faded from his eyes. The power flowing into me stuttered and soured, turning from pure life to a sickening, corrupted energy that felt like death. The heartstone, the very soul of the mountain, had been poisoned. The silence that followed the stone's cry was more profound than any roar. It was the sound of a world holding its breath, waiting for its own death. The crimson light of the blood moon still washed over us, but it was a funeral shroud now, illuminating the black, necrotic veins spreading through the heartstone. The hum of the mountain's life force had become a discordant, painful buzz, a sound of agony that echoed not in our ears, but in our very souls. The pack, moments before united in victory, now whimpered, a low, collective sound of distress. They felt the poison spreading through their home, a cold sickness seeping into the rock, into the air, into their spirits. The connection I had forged with them was now a conduit for the shared pain, and I felt their fear and despair as keenly as my own. Garrick's hands tightened on my face, his golden eyes wide with a horror that mirrored mine. "No," he breathed, a denial ripped from the depths of his being. He turned to the stone, his hand going to the hilt of a fallen hunter's blade, as if he could physically cut the corruption out. "It won't work," I gasped, the poisoned energy making me weak, nauseous. "The obsidian it's like a sliver of shadow. It's not just in the stone, it's dissolving into its energy, corrupting it from within." Lyra, the old seer, shuffled forward, her clouded eyes fixed on the dying crystal. "The curse of the unraveling," she whispered, her voice a death rattle. "An ancient poison forged in the dark spaces between worlds. It does not break the stone. It unmakes it." The black veins crept higher, the stone's beautiful blue light flickering like a dying candle. Panic began to ripple through the pack. This was not a wound that could be healed by tooth or claw. This was the end. The mountain was dying. "There must be a way, Garrel," Garrick snarled, his desperation a raw, open wound. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, searching for another miracle. "The first Luna, Lirael. The text said she healed the mountain." "She healed it from famine and plague," I said, my heart sinking as the terrible truth settled upon me. "She nourished it. This is a poison aimed at the soul. To heal it, you can't just give it light. You have to take the darkness away." My own words hung in the air, a final, terrible revelation. I looked at the heartstone, then at the terrified faces of the wolves who had, for a few brief moments, called me Luna. I looked at Garrick, my mate, the wolf who had crossed the world for a memory of my laughter. His vow echoed in my mind. "My heart is your heart. My life is your vow." I knew what I had to do. "Prineth no kitsuk manha," Garrick said, his voice a choked whisper. He had followed my thoughts, seen the decision in my eyes. The bond between us was that strong. He grabbed my arm, his grip a desperate anchor. "There is another way. We will find it." "There is no time," I said softly, placing my free hand on his chest, over the frantic beating of his heart. I poured every ounce of love, of gratitude, of forever into my touch. "You vowed your life to me. Now let me vow mine to the pack, to our home." I leaned in and pressed my lips to his. It was not the kiss of victory I had almost had, but it was more. It was a kiss of farewell, of absolute love, a promise that transcended life and death. It was the first and the last time I would ever taste him, and it was the sweetest agony I had ever known. The kiss was a vow of its own, sealing my soul to his forever. Before he could react, while he was still lost in the shock and the sorrow of it, I pushed back, breaking his grip. "Hold them back," I commanded, and my voice was no longer that of Prineth, the rescued Omega. It was the voice of the Luna, absolute and unquestioned. He froze, his alpha instincts warring with his mate bond. The command of his Luna was a law of nature he could not defy. I turned and ran to the Heartstone, ignoring the cries of the pack, ignoring Garrick's tormented roar of my name. I placed both hands flat against the crystal, right over the nexus of the spreading darkness. Instead of drawing power out, I reversed the flow. I opened myself completely, my soul becoming a vacuum. Come to me, I commanded the poison. Leave the stone. I am your vessel now. The pain was instantaneous and absolute. It was a fire of pure unmaking shadow. It flooded my veins, searing my spirit, turning my blood to ice and my bones to dust. A scream was torn from my throat, a sound that was not human, not wolf, but something elemental and agonized. The silver blue spiral on my arm blazed, then turned a sick, violent black. But it was working. The black veins in the Heartstone receded. With every ounce of poison I drew into myself, the crystal grew brighter. The beautiful, life-giving blue light returned, pushing back the shadows, stronger and more vibrant than before. The discordant buzz in the cavern softened, returning to its harmonious, life-affirming hum. I could feel the collective sigh of relief from the pack as the mountain soul was cleansed. My vision was tunneling, the edges turning gray. The faces of the wolves blurred into indistinct shapes. The only thing I could see clearly was Garrick. He was fighting his own instincts, his body rigid, his face a mask of utter agony as he obeyed my final command and did not come for me. Tears carved paths through the blood and grime on his cheeks. His lips formed my name over and over, though no sound came out. I was dying, but as I died, I was giving life. I poured the last of my own strength, my own light, into the stone, a final gift to seal the healing. I was Prinith Valora. I had been prey. I had been a curse. But I would die a queen. My strength gave out. My hands slipped from the crystal surface. My legs buckled. The world went black. I was falling, but I knew I would not hit the floor. He would be there to catch me. He would always be there. Light. Not the crimson light of the moon or the blue light of the stone, but a soft, warm light like the first ray of dawn. I felt weightless, at peace. The pain was gone. I opened my eyes. I was lying on the fur-covered bed in Garrick's chamber. A gentle fire crackled in the hearth. The air smelled of pine and storm-touched stone. It smelled of him. I sat up. I felt whole, stronger than before. I looked down at my arm. The spiral crest was there, not glowing, but etched into my skin like a faint silver tattoo. It was a permanent part of me now. The chamber door opened. Garrick stood there, his face haggard, his eyes red-rimmed. But when he saw me, truly saw me, awake and alive, a look of such profound, earth-shattering relief washed over him that it stole my breath. He crossed the room in 2 strides and fell to his knees beside the bed, burying his face in my lap. His whole body shook with shuddering, silent sobs. He was not a king. He was just a wolf who had gotten his mate back from the jaws of death. I threaded my fingers through his dark hair, holding him, my own tears starting to fall. "How?" I whispered when he had finally quieted, his breathing still ragged against me. He looked up, his golden eyes shining. "The stone," he said, his voice thick. "When you gave it your light, it gave you its life. You didn't just heal it, Prinith. You merged with it. Your heart beats with the heart of the mountain. You are not just our Luna, you are our home." Alara's words from the old text came back to me. Her blood was the mountain's soul. It had been literal. He rose and sat on the edge of the bed, taking my hands. "The hunters have been dealt with. The pack, they are yours, Prinith, utterly. Kael is the first in line to swear his fealty. He guards this door and has not slept since you fell." A new era had begun, born of sacrifice and shadow. The hunters had come to steal our future, and in doing so, had delivered it into my hands. They had meant to break us, and instead they had forged us into something stronger than ever before. "They thought I was prey," I whispered, looking at the silver mark on my arm. "They were wrong," Garrick murmured, his thumb stroking the crest. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. The love in his eyes was a universe, a kingdom, a home. You were always the queen. He closed the final distance between us, and his lips met mine. There was no interruption, no battle cry, no dying scream. There was only the quiet, profound rightness of two souls, bound by fate and forged in fire, finally coming home. It was not a kiss of beginning or of victory. It was a kiss of forever. And in the heart of the mountain, our kingdom was finally safe.